Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah. We are on Daf Lamed Vav, Amud Bet. Started the Mishnah. We're going to restart the Mishnah again in the middle of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zechut Rufah Shelma for Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, Michael ben Nahid, Esther Bracha bat Chaya, Abraham Jamshid ben Tajgol. Today's Amud is also being learned as a Zechut for Aliyat Neshama of Jacqueline bat Abraham, that her neshama shel Avan Aliyah. This month's learning of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Shea family, Dayan family, and Cohen families. It should be an ultimate zechut for all the mishpachot. Amen. So these are the last mishnayot. This and the next mishnah of discussion of how exactly we're going to use the Arba Minim. The last mishnah that we had was about the kashrut of the four minim, the four species of the lulav. And now we're going to discuss the holding of them together, tying the lulav, hadassah, and arava together. Is the discussion of this mishnah. En ogdin et lulav ela b'mino, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. We discussed that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you cannot use anything else but the actual arba minim for tying the lulav. So, what traditionally we do is taking one piece of a leaf from the lulav and tie the arba minim, tie lulav, hadas, arava together with, but you could use any of those, hadas, arava, for tying the lulav, says Rabbi, but nothing else. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir disagrees, afilu bechut b'mshicha. You could even do it with a string, with a rope. Doesn't make a difference how you tie it. You could tie them together with anything. Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir uses a page from the book of Rabbi Yehuda, actually still bringing a story. It says, it was a story that the Anshe Yerushalayim, the minhag was that to show chibub mitzvah, they would have strings of gold, that they would tie the lulav with it. Ogdin el lulav ehen begimuniot shel zahav. And Chachamim tell Rabbi Meir, it's not a raya. That story that you bring, it's not a proof, because beneath the gold that you see, they already had tied it with lulav, and that was just for beauty. Rabbi Meir, right? The Rabbi Meir says this was a proof that they could use anything for tying lulav, and say no, it was already tied. You will tell me, how can you have gold on top of it? We'll discuss if it's chatzisa, if it's not chatzisa. Indeed, the Meiri over here writes that the gold maybe was on top, higher up on the lulav, or he says maybe it was actually right on top of the eged, right on top of the tie with the leaf of lulav. And that becomes a discussion whether it's chatzisa, it's not chatzisa. The Gemara is going to discuss that, says the Gemara. Amar Rava. Rava says, afilu besiv, afilu beikara dedikla. Even if you want to say that you need to have lulav, it doesn't have to be mamash, the leaf of the palm tree. It could be any part of the palm tree. Anything from this species of lulav is considered kasher. Now, siv and ikara dedikla, siv is the stuff that grows, stringy stuff that grows around the trunk of the tree, and ikara the dikla could mean really actually the wood itself. You can use anything pretty much. Now, so long as it is the species of arba minim, it is kasher. Now, he's going to come back to this in just a moment to try to actually prove it scientifically from Shita of Rabbi Yehuda himself. But before that, says Rava another halacha. Ve'amar Rava, my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda. What is the reason that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you only could use lulav, hadas, v'arava to tie them? And says the Gemara, kasava lulav sarich eged. We have been introduced to this before, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that lulav needs to be tied together. You can't just hold in your hand the three species of lulav, hadas, arava together like this. It doesn't work. It has to be tied together. So once it has to be tied together, the tie itself is part of the lulav. And hence, says Rava, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that you need the eged of lulav. Ve'imaiti mina acharina, if you bring a fifth type of a different species, hava chamisha mini, because it's part and parcel of the lulav. If you bring something else, now you have how many types? It's a necessary part. If it's a necessary part of lulav, and now you have lulav, hadas, arava, X, and you have etrog. So you have this X becomes a fifth type. We're not supposed to have fifth type. That's Bal Tosif. It's adding to the Torah. So therefore, you can't do it. So says the Gemara, V'amar Rava, mina mina la desiv ve'ikara de dikla mina de lulav. How do I know? The first halakha that I said, that any part of dekel, any part of the palm tree could be used for tying the lulav, not just the leaves. How do I know that? Says the Gemara, Rava said, I could prove it to you from the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda himself, the Tanya. We learned in the Braita, Basukot teshavu shivat yamim. This that you have to sit in the sukkah 7 days. Another machloket Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir is a very interesting one actually, which makes it much harder to live with the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. And that is, Sukkah shel kol davar divrei min. Rabbi Meir says, you can make the schach from any item that checks the boxes, that is gidule karka, it grows from the ground, is detached from the ground, is not mekabel tumah, check, you're good to go. Anything. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. The schach of the Sukkah has to be from the 4 species of lulav, hadas, arava, etrog. Either of the 4, nothing more than that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, en sukkah noheget ela bedalet minim shebelulav. You could only use the arba minim, the 4 species, for making a schach. So you could make schach from palm leaves, but you cannot make from bamboos. That's pasul according to Rabbi Yehuda. So says Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda said a kal v'chomer, v'hadin notin. It really is a kal v'chomer. Uma lulav she'en noheg belilot kebeyamim. Lulav etrog hadas v'arava, the mitzvah of nanuim, is only during the day. You can't take the arba minim at night. It has to be beyom harishon. It has to be in the day. And therefore, even lulav that's only during the day, it has to be from 4 species. Sukkah itself, the schach of Sukkah itself, that is applicable both in the day and at night, is more chamur. Right? The mitzvah of Sukkah, you're not absolved from Sukkah at night. So it's a more stringent, it's a more chamur mitzvah. Isn't it the halacha, isn't the kal vachomer, that should also have the chumrah that you could only use the 4 species? For lulav, hadas, arava, and etrog, that is only during the day, you could only use these 4. For sukkah, that is more chamur, isn't it the din that it should be only from this 4 as well? Let's read it to the Gemara. Sukkah that is applicable during the night, just like during the day. Isn't it din, isn't it kal v'chomer, that it should also be applicable only with those 4 minim, that you should be able to make schach of your sukkah only from those 4. So says the Gemara, Amru lo, Chachamim told Rabbi Yehuda, that's not a kal v'chomer. What kind of kal v'chomer is that? Now let's think of kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer means you have a din of a chumrah that you want to learn from something that is kal, something that is more lenient, lower level, to something that's higher level. That if this lower level thing has this chumrah, the higher level thing surely should have that chumrah. That's kal v'chomer, right? But that's only if you're learning what we said. You're learning a chumrah from a lower level to a higher level, right? But if you have something that could be a chumrah, could be a kula, depends on what exactly the scenario is. Then if you could turn into a massive kula, massive leniency, then it's not the kal v'chomer any longer. Now, how does this turn into a massive leniency? The Gemara is going to say, This Gemara is very surprised. Says, that's a kal v'chomer. That's not a kal v'chomer. Amru lo, kol din shata dan tchilato lachmir. Any din kal v'chomer that you learn in the beginning of it is lachmir, just like here. You're saying only 4 species you could use for schach. That's a chumrah, right? But sofo la'akel, but it turns into being a kula, which we're going to see in just a second. Einodin. That is not the kal v'chomer. Now, how does this turn into a massive leniency all of a sudden? How does this turn into a massive leniency? Says the Gemara, because lo matza arbat minin, if you don't find the 4 species of lulav, if you don't find enough palm leaves or any of the other 3 species, what are you going to do? Not have a sukkah? Because you only could have this 4? So if you didn't find those 4, you're just going to sit there and that year I don't have sukkah. That's a massive kula. According to Rabbi Yehuda, can you imagine if you're in a place that you don't have the 4 species? You only have bamboo mats with the chsher of badatz. Can't have sukkah, sorry. Rabbi Meir is eating in the sukkah, Rabbi Meir is sitting outside. No sukkah. A massive kula. So says the Gemara, they told Rabbi Meir, that is not a kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer is only if you're learning a chumrah from a lower level item to a higher level item. But something that could be a kula, could be a chumrah, that's not a kal v'chomer. So lo matzah arbat minin yeh yoshevu batel. So therefore, it's not. That's the first line of attack. So Chachamim answer 3 strong answers to Rabbi Yehuda. A is what we said. So this is not a kal v'chomer to begin with. You know, get off the high horse. This is not a kal v'chomer. In its structure, is not kal v'chomer because it could be a chumrah the ati lidei massive kula. Secondly, says the Gemara, v'atorah amra basukot teshevu shiv'at yamim. The pasuk that says live in the sukkah, it says basukot teshvu shivat yamim, sukkah shel kol davar. Basukot, any sukkah, it's plural form. Even though that it says it without the wav, but basukot we read, it's plural form, any sukkah is kasher. It's not like hadas v'arava and etrog and lulav that it says it is specific lulav, kachtem lachem bayom harishon, right? Pri etz adar. That is very much specified. Over here says basukot, any sukkah is fine. That's the second answer to Rabbi Yehuda. And the third and final one is, wait a second. You remember earlier on in the Masechet, we discussed a pasuk in Nehemiah, that when Ezra and Nehemiah are taking back the exile to Eretz Yisrael, they actually had the Chag HaSukkot, which was a glorified, amazing Chag HaSukkot, and they give them exact directions of what to do. They give them exact direction of what to do. And this is what the pasuk says. Se'u hahar, go out to the mountain, says the pasuk, and find the following items. Ve'eviu ale zayit, bring the branches of an olive tree, ve'ale etz shemen, ve'ale hadas, ve'ale tmarim, ve'ale etz avot, ve'asu sukkot. Bring all these items, and there are things that are not considered one of the 4 minim, and it's there. Right? Last I checked, Zayit is not one of the 4 minim, and still is good. So says the Gemara, I see that the pasuk in Nehemiah says, build your sukkah with this, which means schach could be from Ale Zayit. So you see exactly, not like Rabbi Yehuda that says only 4 species. So how does Rabbi Yehuda answer this? And all along we have wanted this one line. Remember, Rava is trying to prove over here that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could use any part of palm tree to tie your lulav. That's what we're trying to do here. So we brought this whole story for this line of the Gemara. We are attacking Rabbi Yehuda's shita 3 different ways. Why? His kal v'chomer is not a kal v'chomer. He holds that the schach of your sukkah could be made only from the 4 species. And the Gemara is saying, Chachamim disagreed with him. A, because it's not a kal v'chomer. B, because it says basukot teshvu, any sukkah, any type of schach. And C, because the pasuk in Nehemiah says you could bring alezayit, you could bring anything from the, and that's talking about asu sukkot. It says, go and make your sukkah. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda savar, hani ledefanot. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, this is coming for the walls of sukkah. The wood from the olive tree is to be used for the fanot of the sukkah, for the walls of the sukkah. Says the Gemara, that means the beginning is for the walls, the end of the pasuk is for the schach. So that's one part. Utnan, and we learned also in the Mishnah, Mesachechin ben Esarim, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you could make schach with nesarim, with boards, right? And says the Gemara, al masiv ve'ikara dedikla mina delulavahu. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds you only could bring the 4 species of lulav, hadas, arava, and etrog for the schach, and yet he says you can make a board into a schach. How do you have a board of lulav? You have a board. Lulav is not a board. It's not a piece of wood. Must be that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about the wood of the palm tree, and the wood of palm tree is considered like lulav itself. It's not that Rabbi Yehuda says you have to have the actual 4 species, so you're putting lulavim on top of your thing, or hadassim on top. It could be also the trunk of the tree, and that's considered arba minim. You see that from the Braita, right? So now Rabbah says, I prove to you that when Rabbi Yehuda says you need min lulav, you need one of the species of lulav, hadas v'arava, to tie your lulav, it doesn't mean that you have to actually take a lulav. You could take sieve, you could take any part of the palm tree to use for a tie, for an egged around your lulav. How did you prove it? Because we established that Rabbi Yehuda holds that your schach could only be from the 4 species, and then we established that Rabbi Yehuda says you could have boards, like large boards on top of your schach. How can you have boards? It's not lulav. So it must be that the wood of lulav tree is considered like lulav. And once the wood is considered like lulav itself, then Rabbi Yehuda also holds that you have to tie your lulav with one of these species, means that you could use any part of those trees to tie it, and it's considered kasher. That's how we established it. That's Rabbah. So says the Gemara, you're back to the original halacha. You say that we only could use the 4 species of lulav, hadas, arava, and etrog, but nothing else for tying the lulav. Is that true? Rabbi Yehuda holds that nothing else could be used. V'hatani, we learned in Braita, sichecha ben esarim shel erez. If you make schach, if you say Rabbi Yehuda holds that only 4 species of lulav could be your schach of sukkah, right? Nothing else could be. You can't have bamboos on your schach. That's what Rabbi Yehuda. Really? But here is what Rabbi Yehuda says. We learned in Braita, sichecha ben esarim shel erez. If you made your schach from boards of erez, what's erez? Cedar. And says Rabbi Yehuda, if it's dalet tfachim, if they're wide, 4 tfachim is too wide already, right? That's gezerat tikra. Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot use that. Shesh ban dalet tfachim, divrei hakol psula. According to everyone is pasul. And by dalet tfachim, if they're less than 4 tfachim wide, Rabbi Meir posel Rabbi Yehuda machshir. So we have here a Braita that black on white says that Rabbi Yehuda allows a schach with a board made out of erez, out of cedar. I thought Rabbi Yehuda holds that you could only use 4 species for schach. But here he says erez. Erez is not one of the 4 species. So how can you have that? Umodeh Rabbi Meir, Shem yesh ben neser leneser. We're finishing, before we answer this question, we're finishing the Braita, that Rabbi Meir is modeh, agrees that if you have between the nesarim, these boards, you have open area that you're going to fill in with schach kasher, with pesel, it would be kasher. Sheim yesh ben neser leneser kim lo neser, then shemaniach pesel benen, you put schach kasher in between them, and that will be kasher. Now says the Gemara, my erez, or the Gemara answer says, you know what erez means? When you say erez, doesn't mean cedar tree, because this is a bomb kasha, right? Rabbi Yehuda, both of these are explicitly mentioned. Rabbi Yehuda explicitly says that you could only use the 4 species. Rabbi Yehuda explicitly says that you could use erez. So that's like, there's no good answer to that, right? That's like a got you moment. Like, you say erez, you say 4 minim. One says, no. Erez means one of the 4 minim. Erez means hadas. Erez is hadas. How do I prove to you that erez means hadas? Last we checked, erez meant cedar. The Gemara say, no, erez doesn't mean cedar, means hadas. The Gemara says, no, that's pashut. I'm not saying this from myself. The pasuk says this. The pasuk in Yeshaya says this. Says the Gemara, Kedarabba bar Rav Huna. This is like Rabba bar Rav Huna. The Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna Amri Berav. They say in the Bet Midrash of Rav, Asara mine arazim. There are 10 different types of erez. What's called erez is not just what we call cedar tree, but there are 10 different species that are called in Lashon HaKodesh erez. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, eten bamidbar erez shita vehadas. So you see that in this pasuk, in Yeshaya Navi in Perek Mem Aleph, hadas is considered one of the species of erez. Eten bamidbar erez shita vehadas es shamin asim ba'arava berosh tidhar ta'ashur yachtav. That's the full pasuk. 10 different species of erez, and one of them is hadas. So says the Gemara, it's not really, it's a nice attempt. It sounded like a bomb kasha, but once you consider that hadas is also called erez, so then it's no longer a question on Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Meir, Omer afilu b'meshicha. Rabbi Meir said that you could even tie them together with a string, right? Rabbi Meir said you could tie them with a string. You could tie them with gold strings, as he brought this story in the Gemara in People and Shei Yerushalayim. Says the Gemara, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Meir, Maaseh beyakirei Yerushalayim. Was a story that the rich fellows in Yerushalayim, they would tie their lulav with strings of gold to make it beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. Amru lo, they told Rabbi Meir, that's not a raya, because misham raya, that's a raya. Beneath the gold, on the bottom, they were tying it with actual lulav, and the gold was only there for beautifying it. Amar lehu Rabba, le'anahu mikadreo shana deberesh kaluta. Now discussing the issue of chasitza, right? How can you hold this when the gold is separating between your hand, perhaps, and the lulav? Or, forget about the gold. This is chachamim, right? Chachamim hold, not like Rabbi Yehuda, Chachamim hold that eged, lulav en sarich eged. Lulav does not have to be tied. Now listen well, if lulav doesn't have to be tied, when you tie it, and then you hold on top of that belt that you have, that's tying the lulav together, that tie which is not necessary, that doesn't have to be there, now it's chatzitza between your hand and the lulav. Because who said that you need it there? You don't need it there. If you don't need it, it should be a chatzitza. You hear? So forget about the gold for a second. According to Chachamim who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, and you don't need an eged for lulav, when you have all these lulav leaves around, and you're holding your lulav on top of these leaves, that are tying it together, there should be a chasisa, there should be a separation between your hand and the lulav. How is that mutar? So therefore, Rabbah was telling the Megadale Hoshana de Beresh Galuta, the people who were in charge of the lulavim of the Resh Galuta and his family, to tie them nicely and so on. Rabbah told them, guys, when you are tying these lulavim, make sure the knots that you make are above the holding place. If you're holding the lulav on the bottom, don't make any knots over there. Make them higher up. This way, you have no chatzitza between your hand and the lulav. He's telling them, Ki gadlitu hoshana de beresh galuta, when you're tying the hoshana, the lulavim of the resh galuta, shayri bebed yad. Leave enough room for a handle that it doesn't have any of those knots, those ties around, that they should be able to hold it without any chatzitza. So says the Gemara, in order for it not to be chatzitza, Rava, this is Rava. Rava said, he says, don't worry about it. It's not such a big deal. Because anything that's coming to beautify the etrog and the lulav and hadas and arava, the bundle, is going to be kasher because it's batel to the set. So if something is coming to bundle them, make them nice together, that would be considered nullified to the set of lulav, hadas, arava, and therefore it's not considered chatzitza. And the same thing would be for even the gold. It's coming to make it nice. It's part and parcel of the thing itself. Therefore, it will be good. The Amar Rabbah. Now, this is going to be starting a whole new piece over here, which is very beautiful. Because Rabbah, who holds that you can't have the tie, the knot on the bottom, he also said you can't be wearing gloves when you hold the lulav hadas v'arava. Imagine in the East Coast when you have places that's cold, right? Especially in a leap year when it's 1 month later and it could be freezing, right? So you want to have your glove. Can you have your gloves on? Well, one issue is, kavod for the mitzvah. Maybe it's not kavod for the mitzvah, and so on, as we see in the Gemara by the service of Beit HaMikdash and wearing gloves. But says the Gemara, over here, Rabbah said, halachically you should not, because chatzitza. You should not hold your lulav with sudar, with a garment, let's call it the gloves. You need to be holding it in your hand, lekichat tama, a full holding. And now you have a chatzitza. And Rava expectedly disagrees. Rava Amar, lekicha al yedei davar acher shma lekicha. You could take it with something else. The glove is batel to your hands, and that is fine. Now this, lekicha al yedei davar acher, holding it with something else, becomes a large sugya by itself, which the Gemara is going to now go to about bringing rayas one way or another to prove the case, whether or not you can hold it with something else or you can't hold it with something else, which we're going to discuss Bezrat Hashem in the next shiur. Hazaku Baruch.